This is an emergency." She shrieked, her voice a high-pitched, frantic whistle that cut through the still mountain air. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, furious crimson that clashed violently with the crisp white of her designer blouse. The dozens of people gathered behind her, a sea of bewildered faces, looked on as she jabbed a finger at the heavy chain I had just locked around my own gate. She was shaking with fury, her manicured hand rattling the steel links. "You cannot do this. I reserved this cabin for the entire community. My wedding party is on the way. We have caterers, a band, a photographer. They'll all be here any minute." My heart was pounding, a wild, frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I looked past her to the crowd, then back at her, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "Ma'am," I said, my voice low and calm, "I don't know who you think you are, but you don't have a reservation. This is my private property, and that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. My name is David, and for the last 5 years, my little slice of paradise has been a 3-acre plot of land tucked away on a secluded mountain lake. The cabin itself is nothing spectacular, log home with a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace that I built myself, stone by excruciating stone. But the property? It's special. It has its own private rocky shoreline, small dock where I park my little aluminum boat, and a winding dirt road that leads up to a heavy wrought iron gate. The gate is a necessity. It keeps the wildlife out and my peace and quiet in. It was my sanctuary, a retreat from the concrete jungle of my city job, a place where I could fish, read, and just be. The property was technically part of the Whispering Pines HOA, but my land was so far removed from the rest of the community that the rules had always felt more like suggestions. I paid my dues, attended a meeting once every 2 years, and generally kept to myself. Life was simple, predictable, and perfectly peaceful. But then, she moved in. Her name was Veronica, and she moved into the McMansion at the bottom of the hill. A hulking monument of glass and steel that looked utterly out of place amidst the rustic charm of the other cabins. The first time I saw her was at the annual summer barbecue. She cornered me by the dessert table, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. A look of disapproval on her face. "You're the new guy, right?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The one with the cabin up the hill?" "I've been here for 5 years," I said, trying to be friendly. "And yeah, that's me. I'm David." She didn't offer to shake my hand. "Well, David, I just want to let you know that I'm the new head of the social committee. We have a lot of changes planned. A lot of improvements. We need to bring this community up to a higher standard." She gestured to the lawn, to the other cabins, to me. Her words weren't a promise of change. They were a thinly veiled threat. I just smiled, mumbled something about a good barbecue, and went to get more coleslaw. I had no idea. I was staring into the eyes of the person who would become my own personal nightmare. The first hint of trouble was an email. Not a violation notice, but an email from Veronica addressed to the entire community. The subject line was important. Community improvements. The email detailed a new plan to turn my property into a community recreation area. It talked about shared access to the lake, a community-wide calendar for reserving my cabin for events, and a plan to have my private dock turned into a public fishing pier. My heart began to pound. She was talking about my home, my sanctuary, like it was a public park. I was so stunned that I didn't even respond. I figured it was a bad joke, a crazy idea that would never gain traction. It wasn't a joke. The next week, I got a text from my next-door neighbor, an old retired gentleman named George. He was a sweet man, and he seemed genuinely distraught. The text read, "Hey David, I just saw a new sign at the top of your road. The HOA is saying your cabin is a community space. What's going on?" I drove up to my gate, and there it was. A brand new, professionally printed sign hammered into the dirt just outside my property line. Whispering Pines HOA, Community Recreation Area. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, All events must be reserved through the HOA social committee. My blood ran cold. She was doing this without my permission, without a vote, without even asking. I ripped the sign out of the ground, threw it in the back of my truck, and drove straight to Veronica's house. I knocked on her front door, my hands trembling with anger. When she opened it, she looked at me with a smirk that was already in place. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" she asked, her voice sugary sweet. "I just saw the sign you put up," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "What is going on, Veronica? You can't just claim my property for the community." She laughed, a short, humorless little puff of air. "Oh, David, I think you're confused. This is a community. We all share. It's for the good of everyone. Besides, you're the only one with lake access. It's only fair that we all get to enjoy it." "It's my private property," I said, my voice rising. "My deed, my land, my cabin. It's not a community space." "Well, we'll just have to disagree on that," she said, and then with a smile that made my skin crawl, she shut the door in my face. I stood there, dumbfounded. The sign in the back of my truck a physical testament to her audacity. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. She wasn't just a new neighbor. She was a genuine threat. The emails started coming in a torrent, dozens of them. All from Veronica, all to the entire community. All with the subject line, event reservations. She was already taking reservations for my cabin. The messages detailed a community potluck, a lakefront fundraiser, and a community family day. I emailed her back, my message short and to the point. "Stop. My cabin is not for rent. It is not a community space. Any reservations you make are void," she replied with a single line. "Your lack of cooperation is noted." A few days later, a certified letter arrived. This wasn't an email, but a formal letter from the HOA, stamped with an official seal. The letter detailed a new set of bylaws, apparently passed in an emergency meeting, that designated all lakefront property as community shared. Space, effective immediately. The letter also stated that my continued refusal to allow community access to my property was in violation of Bylaw 6.2, community good faith and cooperation, and would result in fines. The fines were astronomical. $1,000 a day for lack of cooperation. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest. This wasn't just a petty squabble. This was a hostile takeover. I was so angry, so utterly hopeless that I couldn't even think straight. I paced my living room, the letter a crumpled ball in my hand. It seemed I was beaten. She had used her new position to change the rules, and I was the one who would pay for it. I felt a sense of isolation growing in me. I was so far removed from the rest of the community that it felt like it was me against everyone. I tried to talk to George, to see if he had any idea how this could have been passed. "I didn't even know there was a meeting," he said, his voice confused. "We never got a notice. It just ... happened. That was the key." She had held a meeting in secret, with only the people she knew would agree with her. She had manipulated the rules and no one else knew. I was on my own. I wasn't just fighting Veronica. I was fighting an entire system she had co-opted. I felt a crushing sense of defeat. A few days later, I drove up to my cabin, ready to spend the weekend in my peaceful retreat, and found a dozen cars parked on my road. People milling around, their faces expectant. I saw Veronica standing by the road, a clipboard in her hand, a triumphant smirk on her face. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "We're getting the cabin ready for the annual potluck," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm just assigning duties. You can help if you want." I stood there, speechless. The audacity, the sheer nerve of her. She was literally trying to turn my home into a community center, with me as an unwilling participant. My peaceful sanctuary was about to be overrun by 100 strangers. I felt a surge of pure, blinding fury. I turned around, got back in my truck, and drove back down the hill. I was not going to let this happen. I was not going to give in. I spent the next few days holed up in my home, trying to figure out what to do. I had to expose her, but I didn't know how. I called an old friend who was a lawyer, explained the situation. He told me that my case was strong, but that getting an injunction to stop the potluck would take time I didn't have. The potluck was in 2 days. I felt a sense of despair. She was going to win. She was going to prove that she could do whatever she wanted, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. Then I remembered something. Something I had completely forgotten. The old bylaws. The ones I had signed 5 years ago when I bought the cabin. They weren't like the new ones. They were old, dusty, and they were in a box in my attic. I knew I had to find them. It was a long shot, but it was my only hope. I spent hours in my attic, rummaging through dusty boxes filled with old tax returns, forgotten photo albums, and Christmas decorations. Just as I was about to give up, I found it. A thick manila envelope, yellowed and brittle with age, stamped on the front in faded ink, Whispering Pines HOA, Official Bylaws minus 2008 edition. I ripped it open.
Ow.
My hands trembling. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the fine print, the clauses, the rules. And there it was, on page 12, in a section titled Community Property, a clause that stated, in no uncertain terms, that the HOA had no authority over private, individually owned property, and that any changes to this rule had to be approved by a 2/3 majority of all property owners, not just the board. My heart was a drum in my chest. She was a complete fraud. She hadn't gotten a 2/3 vote. She had just made up the new bylaws and sent them out. All of her actions were based on a lie. All of the fines were fake. She was exposed. I spent the next few hours meticulously documenting everything. I took pictures of the old bylaws, highlighted the key clauses, and created a document detailing all of Veronica's fabricated rules and fines. I went back to my friend, the lawyer. He read my documents with wide, shocked eyes. "She's a menace," he said, his voice filled with quiet rebellion. "This is classic Karen behavior, but on a scale I've never seen before. You have everything you need. But how are you going to get this out to the community?" "I'm not going to get it out to the community," I said, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "I'm going to let the community come to her. Tomorrow is the potluck. She's expecting 100 people." The next morning I woke up early. The air was crisp and cold, the lake still and glassy. It was the perfect day for a potluck. I drove down to the local hardware store and bought a heavy-duty chain and a thick padlock. I drove back to my cabin, walked up to my gate, and, for the first time in 5 years, I locked it. I stood there, a quiet sentinel, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. At around 11 o'clock, the first car started to arrive. A dozen of them. Then a few more. And then a bus. A big, white tour bus, with Caterers of the Pines written on the side. My heart was pounding, a wild, frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I saw Veronica drive up in her SUV, her face a mask of triumphant glee. She got out of her car, saw me standing by the gate, and her smile faltered. The hundreds of people gathered behind her, a sea of confused faces looked on. "What are you doing, David?" She shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "Unlock this gate right now. My wedding party is on the way." "Wedding party?" I asked, my voice low and calm. I thought this was a community potluck. She looked at the crowd, then back at me, her face turning a furious crimson. She had lied to the community. This wasn't a community event at all. It was a wedding party she had planned without anyone's permission. Private event she was trying to force on my land, with the excuse that it was a community event. "This is an emergency." She shrieked, her voice a high-pitched, frantic whistle that cut through the still mountain air. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a furious crimson that clashed violently with the crisp white of her designer blouse. The dozens of people gathered behind her, a sea of bewildered faces, looked on as she jabbed a finger at the heavy chain I had just locked around my own gate. She was shaking with fury, her manicured hand rattling the steel links. "You cannot do this. I reserved this cabin for the entire community. My wedding party is on the way. We have caterers, a band, a photographer. They'll all be here any minute." My heart was pounding, a wild, frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I looked past her to the crowd, then back at her, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "Ma'am," I said, my voice low and calm. "I don't know who you think you are, but you don't have a reservation. This is my private property." And that's when everything went wrong. She wasn't just a liar. She was a fraud. 150 people were standing in the middle of a dirt road, waiting for a wedding that was never going to happen. I watched as the caterers, the band, and the photographer all began to pull up behind the crowd, their faces confused. I stepped forward, holding the old brittle bylaws in my hand. "Everyone," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I have something to show you. Veronica has been lying to you. This is not a community event. She has no right to use my land. Her new bylaws are a fraud. This entire thing is a scam." I began to read from the old bylaws, the clause about community property, the clause about the 2/3 vote, the clause that gave me every right to lock my own gate. As I spoke, the crowd erupted. People were talking, whispering, looking at Veronica with a new, suspicious gaze. She was cornered. She looked like a rat trapped in a cage. Her husband, a quiet, unassuming man, walked up to her, his face a mask of mortification, and began to whisper in her ear. She was exposed, defeated, and she had no one to blame but herself. The moral of the story is simple, and it's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Never, ever assume you're beaten. And never underestimate the power of a man who has nothing left to lose. I have a long road ahead of me, a new battle to fight. The lawsuit to get her to pay for the fines she issued, the fight to have her removed from the HOA board for good. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid. I'm ready. Because Veronica's petty tyranny was just the beginning. I've been a target before, and I'll be a target again. But next time, they won't even see me coming.